I'm Ivy Cohn. Welcome to Fuki Cafe. My guest today is Rob O'Grady, author of a book just published this year entitled 150 Strong, Pathway to a Different Future. Rob, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ivy.
Well, it's interesting that you would have written this book. Your background is as an engineer, and this book really is a combination of the history of some of our forms of organizing ourselves, and then a look at how we might do that differently. So it's just come out this year, and I don't know if you know how many sales you've had so far, but hopefully many.
Yeah, the book's done well. I'm thankful to have had Dmitry Orlov edit the book, who has quite a following, a very loyal following, and through his readership, that's got quite some publicity. And I've had emails from people all around the world giving me feedback, and it's been really very interesting.
Well, I know for myself, I have not been someone who has followed, economic patterns at all. In fact, I've run screaming in the other direction. So you laid out some of the history of how we've organized ourselves in recent times, capitalism, communism, etc., in a way that really allowed me to kind of wrap my mind around it and gave me a bit of a better framework. And I really appreciate that because you used simple language that anybody can wrap their mind around.
So I think this is important because collectively it would seem that there's a real problem in trying to confront our issues. It's easy to say there's a problem with capitalism. There's many films, books, documentaries that we can watch which can show all the problems, and activists will speak up against the way things are. But what's the alternative? We can criticize capitalism, but communism is put forward as the alternative, and that's very easily argued against. People criticize socialism, and beyond that sort of pairs of opposites situation, I think there's a need to try and understand things a different way. And being an engineer, I'm interested in systems and first principles, and taking it right back to the level of how a system works. The most important thing is the incentive structure that operates. And when we look at, say, for example, our environmental problems, we've got an incentive system which acts against sustainability. And I begin the book with the simple equation of profit equals income minus expenses. And the incentive is to make profit. You don't make a profit. As a business, you don't exist. As a government, you don't get taxation revenues. You need profit. You need money coming in. And the trouble with this system is that you need to increase income, you need to increase consumption, you need to do more all the time. And this means using more resources. It is not a conservation-based culture. And on the other side of that equation, you want to minimize your expenses. You want to do things as cheaply as possible. You want to limit costs as much as possible. And this means that spending extra money on doing things a more sustainable way, protecting the environment, is negative in a profit sense. So on that very basic level, you've got a system that doesn't work in terms of sustainability. And you can't really go past that. And that has to be the beginning point of a discussion. And it's a difficult discussion because it's the way all of our society is organised, and almost an impossibility, many would think, to think of a different way of doing things. On the other side of this traditional dichotomy of capitalism and socialism, or communism, is the idea that the government should organise everything. And this is an incentive structure where the leaders want to stay in power. That's their most important incentive. They want to rule. They want to be in control. They don't want to give away their power. And it depends on what they think. Everyone else has to do what they think, and they may have some feedback loops to get information back. But it really depends on the quality of the leaders and the people within the structure. You know, they might be being oppressed, and their incentive is to avoid being persecuted, and that doesn't work very well either. So then that's kind of where it all stops, and people don't really talk about it anymore. And what I tried to do is think of how there could be some other way of incentivizing our behavior. And it turns out, as we'd all expect, that in history, we never really operated this way. In the Western world, this capitalism, profit motive system might have operated for 500 years, possibly longer in isolation, and really only came to be the dominant force in our culture maybe in the last 150, 200 years. And in other cultures, it's even more recent than that. They've been colonized with this model, and it's a new thing. And in history, the way we evolved is as a collective. We're a social animal who live in groups, and the way that we've organised our culture in the past, in the way of sharing resources, protecting the environment, is that we have worked together, and the incentive has been to look after all the people within your group. And in that system, a very different dynamic operates. So I saw a video on Facebook just this week which painted a picture, and some people will no doubt have seen it, but they say, what if the world was a village, if it was 100 people? And they go on to say so many would be Christian, so many would be Muslim, and these many could read and write and these wouldn't. And at the end they say this one person would have half the money, and these 50 people would have almost nothing. And the question they pose at the end, which is a very interesting one, was, if the world was 100 people, would this be allowed to happen? And of course the answer is no, because when people know each other, there's a very different relationship. So a long answer to your question.
Yeah, well, and that notion of, you know, if the world were 100 people, well, we're 7+ billion. And how do we bring that leap of consciousness around caring for each other to those large numbers? And I think your book makes it clear that it only can occur if you do it in a small group first. If that, I mean, we've lost in Western societies, we've really lost the connections between us. It's all very impersonal, and you have a few friends, but really there's no accountability between, you know, that loaf of bread on the grocery shelf and you. You know, where did it come from? You know, who is involved in making that bread? I'm just a tiny example, but you know, I think that as a group of people begin to have those accountabilities, that 150 strong, the title of your book, that could eventually become a more global kind of a sense where we're caring for each other in a different way.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think what we see in our system of politics, which is the way we organise our society, we see a total breakdown. It's just a farce. It's idiotic the way that we have this sort of very simplistic spectacle where we get people completely disconnected from us who are going to represent our views, and we know that nothing will ever really be achieved because it's all so remote from us. And I think that it doesn't take much convincing to say that there's not much hope in trying to achieve anything in that way. I mean, things happen in the way of international treaties, and these are good things, of course, but ultimately history would suggest they're going to fall short. And what we can do, though, is we can do something within our own lives, and we can also have the idea that it can be different. And if we understand there's a different model, that creates a potential.
Yes. And it's that being exposed to the notion that it could be different.
I think
And
so.
and then that, you know, the personal responsibility, because that personal responsibility factor has pretty well flown out the window as there, you know, just so many people, power is centralized. You know, I had no input on, you know, the recent treaty action, you know, me personally, and whoever was representing me did not have my best interest at heart. So how do we begin to embrace that it could be different and implement things in our lives to begin to create a different way of operating?
Well, I can tell you in my own life, I say, for example, in my work, I'm involved with a business, and we quite definitely have this idea of being a group of 150 people. We try and look out for each other. We've got the idea that we're more than just a business. We are a group of people who are trying to support each other and making a living. And when we deal with our clients, we try and make our relationships personal, which is a difficult thing. We'll often be told, "This is business. This is what's in the contract. You must do that. You must do this." But at the same time, we need to connect as people and try and be reasonable. And this has an effect. It's really interesting. People notice. They feel it's different. And over a period of years, 20 years we've been working together, there's a real strength that has developed. Not everyone's been involved for that long, but through the shared experience of sticking by each other and having some camaraderie and some collegiality, it's something that we all value. And then in my personal life, in writing this book, it's been quite interesting. I've had to step back and say, well, who is my 150? And then make it an intention to reach out to these people who I have connections with, family, friends, and neighbours, people I run into in the course of my life, and have the idea that these relationships are important.
Well, and you have your business environment that has obviously embraced this notion of the 150 strong, which I mean, was this an intention back in the day, many years ago, by this business that you are involved in, or did this sort of over time, simply by the very nature of working closely together? But was it a conscious sort of piece that this group of people were embracing?
No, not at all. No. Uh, and this is where it's interesting, because I think this is something that's natural to people, and people understand straight away, because it's something that all of us will have an idea of. We've all got a network of people, um, and we all understand that these connections are what makes our life fulfilling, and that's why I think it's got so much potential. It's innate to us. It's in our DNA. And what was really interesting, when I started on this book, I didn't really know what the answer would be. I didn't even have the 150 concept. I just started with some ideas and tried to develop them. And then when I came across this notion of Dunbar's number, I was immediately able to recognize it in the context of my own life. I said that, oh, this is really interesting. This is exactly what we've done. It's and that gave me some real confidence that this was something with some potential. Mm.
So you have this business with your 150 strong principle in place,
Yeah.
and then each one of those people has, if you thought of their business relationship to you and the rest of the group of engineers and so forth, but each one of them has another, 149 people elsewhere, as it were.
Mm.
And there's some overlap, but do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah. And this is quite correct. I think that I should also say this isn't my business. It's a group of people who have the business as well. So I'm just one of a group. Um, the uh, the interconnection of groups is part of modern life. We don't live in a little village anymore. We live in cities, but we still have these networks. Just as you say, we've got a network within our business, our work life, of 150 people, and these people will have other people that they work with in their network, and they've got their own families. Some might belong to a church group or a sports club, and it's not that we are one particular group, but I think that the key thing is that it's innate to us. We want to find these groups of belonging. We we don't have to artificially construe it. It happens anyway. And
But we
how
don't
this
necessarily think about it. And
that's
I
right.
and I
Yeah.
think that's one of the brilliant, aspects of the book, is that it caused me to really think about, okay, so who are my principal 150
Mm,
people in my world? Because as I just said, you have one group of 150, but you may also, in another environment, be interfacing with people who are not necessarily part of that principal group of 150. So there's a lot of overlapping that is occurring, but the central group, the 150 people that I could ring up on the phone, at an odd hour and say, hey, my water pipe broke, I really need help. You know, who are those people, and how much have I nurtured my relationship with them?
mm,
Have I been paying attention to nurturing? Have I been listening to
mm,
what their needs are?
mm,
Because all those things are strengthening those bonds. And you're right. I think this is, we naturally gravitate towards small groups that we know well.
mm. And
So,
something else that's interesting too is that our culture is works against this, and this is one of our problems. But we're incentivized to protect ourselves. We have to hoard our wealth. We have to put in place contracts uh, and it's kind of going against the current to share and to if you were to look at on a big picture level, one of the things that Marxists would talk about is alienation, And they would say that our current way of doing things alienates people. It separates them from the fruits of their work, and this is very true. People in a society can be isolated. They, if you're engaged in a job where you're going to be sacked at any minute because you're only on a 0 hours contract where you don't have any security of your work, you may have to move out of your community because you can't pay your rent, and maybe you're working very long hours so you can't sustain these relationships. There's all sorts of factors working to isolate people, and this is something quite different to think about, trying to stabilize it. And in the book I speak about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the primary one people need is security, and we operate in a system where people aren't secure, they're very insecure, and they're very fearful. People have guns, and they the economic system isn't very settled. Families, they're under pressure, and in Maslow's hierarchy, these next levels where people can be fulfilled and care about things beyond themselves, it's more difficult to do.
Well, this is a challenge. We have almost everything operating against the notion of creating small, caring groups of people.
Yeah.
Everything in Western society and culture is pretty well aimed at isolation, separation, me. So we have some hurdles here, but it is also precisely the time when we need this kind of coherent small group where we have a sense of security and safety, perhaps only within that small group, because things are very unsettled out there. And the systems that have been in place are obviously in big trouble, falling apart, not working well. So, it may only be within one's own immediate community. And again, as you said, we're not living in villages for the most part anymore. We're living in metropolitan areas. So how does one carve out that sense of community, of 150 within, 550,000 people? And, I found myself thinking, gosh, I should make a list. I should just mechanically write down a list of the 150 people in my world that would comprise that group for me.
So I think something else which goes along with that is that strength is developed through shared experience and struggle, and people bond over difficult times and difficult things they have to do. And this is where over the course of time, people working together and having to reconcile their differences to get over each other's foibles and really make things happen in a real way, that is what is an organization's strength. Then you've got something to lose. You feel like you're a part of something, and you've got backup too. That the people that you're working with or that you're living with, they will stick by you, and you will look after them, and then it becomes a real thing.
Mm-hmm. So what inspired you, Rob, to actually write the book?
Well, my background is that when I did my engineering studies, I went into a program where they did sustainability engineering, and we were taught lots of good things in the way of cleaner production and green business, and trying to do things a better way. And this was in the 90s, after they'd had the summit in Rio, and sustainability was a word that was getting used increasingly. And we had some very passionate people teaching us. And I was interested in why these things, what effect, how useful they were. And obviously, it's better to do things the green way. But ultimately, I could see that the incentive structure wasn't lining up with what we're talking about. And one example would be, say, for example, BP. They had this slogan, I think, Beyond Petroleum. And for a while there, they had advertisements with people with solar powers and biofuels, and they were presenting themselves as a green company. But then they got a new CEO. I'm not sure what happened. They just ditched it all completely. It wasn't making money. It was not part of their growth strategy, and it all went out the window because they're a business. They need to return value to their shareholders. At the end of the day, the shareholders will think it's nice if they're going to try and save the planet, but really they want money. And so I finished that line of study and went into life and carried on in a normal way with my career and family and all the rest of that normal life stuff. But beyond that, I've always maintained an interest. I've read books, I've watched documentaries, I've tried to think it all through and never really come up with a coherent framework of understanding which satisfied these concerns.
The greed factor is so embedded in everyone's consciousness, and it's led to disaster. I mean, we've not done well in being good stewards of Mother Earth. So we're facing some pretty serious challenges because of these ways of conducting business. And I don't know if there's enough time to actually be able to, I personally don't think that there's much hope here. I think we're going to go out as a radioactive methane fireball, but that's just what I think. However, with whatever time we have left, it would be a delightful break with the way things have been to reclaim our humanness, our authentic ability to be in relationship, and to not be basing what we're doing on greed, but on the notion of caring for each other and sharing. And I think that that's one of the points here in your book, is that there's another way of being and another way of interacting and living together. So, the pathway to a different future is your tagline. And so even though we don't know how much future there may be out there, the notion of actually shedding some of these cultural shackles and economic shackles that have been upon us. And that's what I see your book bringing forth the notion of, is another way of engaging with life and activity and commerce and all of it.
Yeah, I think so. I think, like you're saying, you can't get away from action and consequence, and we've set up a pretty messy situation for ourselves. We can't easily square that off. And there's another aspect to what you're saying, and this is Dmitry, the editor. He is a Russian, and he experienced the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what he was able to see and relate from his experience was that it was these relationships that I talked about that were the things that got people by. The government stopped working, the police no longer really looked after law and order, and food stopped arriving, but people were able to organize themselves through their networks to get what they needed. And looking to the future, there's different ways people go about it. Some people think that we should be preparing in the way of maybe dropping out of society, and some people go so far as to get a cabin in the woods and some weapons and tinned food, and maybe that's fine for them. But I think resilience comes from these relationships. Tough times, when you're challenged and you're able to draw on a network, that's your best preparation.
I agree 100%. And you're right, going through a mutual experience that's difficult, you know, bonds people together in a deep way. And it is that, you know, progression of mutual experiences, both the good and the bad, that strengthen those bonds. And yes, we have some challenging times coming, all the more reason to nurture and cultivate your 150, whoever they are and wherever you are. This is a good notion, and a needful notion. I'm just I'm so pleased, Rob, that I became exposed to your book and was able to, you know, come up to speed on some of the history of how we got here, and then look at some of the notions you present as to how we can proceed forward. So do you have any other plans for writing?
No, not really. although,
Writing one book did you in?
but what I have been doing is I've been revisiting some of the material, serializing it on a couple of websites, and that's very interesting. And the other thing too is people write to me with other references and ideas, and they stimulate my thinking, and there is a whole bunch of other stuff that flows from this. One thing that I've spoken about a little bit in the book is the fact that there's a potential to organise yourselves politically in small groups. And I didn't want to go too deep into this because it can get a bit far-fetched, but there is some potential in this, and that the way we elect leaders now is very removed from, there's not much context between a leader and the people they represent. Mm-hmm. But if we were to select leaders from amongst our peers, and they had to interact with people within small groups, there'd be a much more subtle reinforcement loop that would operate. And maybe there's some potential in that, I don't know. And maybe there's another book, but
well, Rob, thank you so much for sitting in conversation with me today. I'm so pleased for you that you're getting the kind of responses from around the world regarding the book. And I know others like myself will gain insight and inspiration to be strengthening their 150, whatever that may look like for them. So thank you so much. I look forward to another conversation in the future.
Thanks, Ivy. It's been a pleasure.
All right. I'm Ivy Kahn. This is Fuki Cafe. Until next time.